We've reviewed how attackers gain initial access, prepare networks over weeks or months, and steal data for double extortion. Now we're going to explore the encryption phase itself, the moment when ransomware actually deploys and systems across the network suddenly become inaccessible. This is the phase that makes headlines. It's dramatic, visible, and immediately devastating, but it's actually the culmination of extensive preparation, and it typically happens very quickly once initiated. Attackers choose the timing of deployment for their ransomware very deliberately. As we discussed in the previous lesson, they wait until they've achieved comprehensive network access, disabled or bypassed security tools, compromised backup systems, and exfiltrated desired data for their double extortion and position themselves to encrypt the maximum critical systems simultaneously. They want to maximize their impact. Modern ransomware deployment is automated and coordinated to achieve simultaneous encryption across the network. Attackers use legitimate IT management tools to push the ransomware executable to multiple systems at once. Group policy in Windows environments, PowerShell scripts, remote management utilities, or task scheduling all provide mechanisms to execute code on multiple systems simultaneously. From the attacker's command and control system, a single command initiates deployment. Within minutes, ransomware begins executing on hundreds or thousands of systems across the network. This simultaneous deployment is critical. If encryption started slowly on a few systems, defenders might detect and respond before widespread damage occurred. Simultaneous deployment across the network creates overwhelming crises that makes effective response extremely difficult. Modern ransomware is also selective about what it encrypts to maximize impact, while ensuring system functionality for ransom payment. It targets user data files, documents, spreadsheets, databases, images, videos, and archives. It encrypts virtual machine files, backup files, and email stores. It targets file servers, database servers, and shared network storage. It deliberately avoids encrypting system files necessary for basic operation. Completely bricked systems can't receive ransom notes or make payments. The victim needs enough functionality to communicate with attackers and process payment. It skips certain file extensions and directories known to contain operating system components. It avoids encrypting its own ransom note files so victims can read them. This selective encryption is more sophisticated than simply encrypting everything. It requires understanding what damage maximizes ransom pressure while maintaining minimal victim capability to pay. Modern ransomware uses strong encryption that is mathematically unbreakable without the decryption key. Common algorithms include AES, Advanced Encryption Standard, with 256-bit keys, and RSA, with 2048 or 4096-bit keys. These are the same encryption standards used to protect legitimate sensitive data. The encryption happens in two stages. Files are encrypted with a symmetric key, AES for speed. That symmetric key is then encrypted with an asymmetric public key, RSA. Only the corresponding private key, which the attacker controls, can decrypt the symmetric key and thus decrypt the files. This cryptographic approach ensures that even if victims capture the ransomware executable and reverse engineer it, they can't decrypt files without the attacker's private key. The encryption is genuinely unbreakable through brute force. Ransomware typically changes encrypted file extensions to signal encryption and make the attack obvious. A document named report.docx becomes report.docx.locked or .ransomware, or includes the specific ransomware variants extension. Different ransomware families use different extensions, often as a form of branding. This makes the encryption immediately visible to users, prevents applications from attempting to open encrypted files as though they were normal files, and reinforces the attacker's control by stamping every file with their mark. Some variants randomize file names entirely, making recovery even more chaotic by destroying the file system organization. After encryption, ransomware delivers ransom notes containing instructions for victims. Notes are placed in multiple locations on the desktop, in every encrypted directory as text files, HTML pages, or changed desktop backgrounds. The redundancy ensures victims see the note regardless of what systems they can access. Ransom notes typically include an explanation of what happened, proof proof that files are encrypted, the ransom amount demanded, payment instructions including cryptocurrency addresses, deadlines creating urgency, and contact information for negotiation. Modern ransom notes are professionally written. They're clear, relatively polite, and sometimes even include customer service language. This professionalism is strategic. Panicked, confused victims are less likely to successfully pay ransoms. Ransomware spreads through networks using various mechanisms to maximize infection scope. Some variants include worm-like capabilities that spread autonomously to other systems. They exploit network vulnerabilities, use stolen credentials to authenticate to additional systems, or leverage file sharing to infect mapped drives. Others rely on the initial deployment mechanism to push all targeted systems simultaneously, rather than spreading organically after initial infection. Network-aware ransomware identifies domain controllers, file servers, backup systems, and other high-value targets specifically, prioritizing their encryption over less critical workstations. Once deployment begins, encryption happens rapidly. Modern ransomware can encrypt thousands of files per minute. An entire file server with millions of files might be encrypted in under an hour. Workstations encrypt in minutes. This speed is intentional. The faster encryption completes, the less time defenders have to detect and respond. Some ransomware provides visual indicators showing encryption progress, percentage complete, number of files encrypted. This is psychological warfare, watching in real time as your data becomes inaccessible. There's a relevant quote from the philosopher and historian Hannah Arendt. In her book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, she wrote, "The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, true and false, no longer exists." Arendt was describing how authoritarian regimes create confusion and helplessness in their subjects. This observation applies to the ransomware encryption phase. The sudden, overwhelming encryption creates a crisis where normal operational reality breaks down. Systems that worked moments ago no longer function. Data that was accessible is now gone. Organizations' understanding of its own IT environment, what's affected, what's still functional, what can be recovered, becomes uncertain. The confusion and helplessness is strategic. Victims in crisis mode, unable to clearly assess their situation, make decisions based on fear and urgency rather than careful analyses. They're more likely to pay ransoms quickly rather than methodically evaluating alternatives. The encryption creates a new reality where the attacker controls access to the organization's own data. This inversion of control is psychological as much as technical. Immediately before or during encryption, ransomware disables recovery mechanisms that would allow easy restoration. It deletes Windows shadow copies and system restore points. It stops and disables backup services. It deletes or encrypts backup files stored on network shares. It corrupts boot records to prevent system recovery. These actions ensure victims can't simply restore systems using built-in Windows recovery features. Recovery becomes significantly more complex, time-consuming, and uncertain. Backup systems are specifically targeted because they represent the primary path to recovery without paying ransom. Ransomware searches for backup software agents and services. It identifies backup servers and storage. It encrypts backup files just like production data. It deletes backup catalogs that track what backups exist. Organizations discover during attacks that backups they believed were protected were actually compromised weeks earlier during the reconnaissance phase when attackers identified and positioned themselves to destroy backups during deployment. Some ransomware variants specifically wait to deploy until they've confirmed backup destruction, ensuring victims have no recovery alternative to paying the ransom. Some ransomware maintains persistence even after encryption completes. If victims attempt to restore systems from backups without removing the attacker's access, the ransomware can simply re-encrypt once restoration completes. This forces victims to thoroughly clean their environment before recovery, adding time and complexity. Persistence mechanisms established during the initial access phase remain active. The attacker can deploy additional ransomware if the first deployment is partially mitigated. They maintain retain the ability to cause additional damage if negotiation breaks down. The first awareness that a ransomware attack is underway typically comes from users reporting problems. Applications won't open files, file extensions have changed, systems display ransom notes, network shares are inaccessible. Users call IT support reporting these symptoms. Initially, IT might suspect individual system problems or limited issues. Only as reports multiply do they realize they're dealing with a coordinated attack affecting the entire environment. By the time the scope becomes clear, encryption has been progressing for minutes or hours. The damage is already extensive. The period immediately after encryption detection is chaotic and critical. Organizations must assess the scope. What systems are affected? What data is encrypted? What functionality remains? They need to contain the spread, isolating affected systems, shutting down network connections, preventing further encryption. They must preserve evidence for forensic investigation and potential law enforcement involvement. They face immediate operational impacts. Business processes that depend on encrypted systems stop functioning and customer service is disrupted. Sometimes production halts and revenue generation ceases. Leadership has to make rapid decisions about incident response, whether to involve law enforcement, engage with the attackers, and initial positions on whether paying ransom is considered. All of this is happening under enormous pressure with incomplete information while the organization is in crisis mode. Ransomware often disrupts the internal communication channels within the organizations. Email systems might be encrypted, phone systems relying on network infrastructure might be down, collaboration tools might be inaccessible, and IT teams struggle to coordinate response when their normal communication channels are compromised. Organizations fall back to personal phones, text messages, and external email accounts. This ad hoc communication is less secure and less organized than normal channels, even further complicating their response. The business impacts of ransomware encryption are immediate and severe. Healthcare providers lose access to patient records, potentially affecting patient care and safety. Manufacturers lose production control systems, halting manufacturing operations. Retailers lose POS point-of-sale systems, preventing sales transactions. Logistic companies lose tracking and routing systems, creating delivery chaos. The financial impact from the business disruption often exceeds the ransom demand. Each day of downtime costs revenue, damages customer relationships, and creates competitive disadvantage. Attackers typically impose deadlines. Pay within this specified period or data will be published, or the price doubles, creating artificial urgency that pressures hasty decisions. At the same time, organizations are trying to find out if they can recover without paying. How long would their recovery take? What's the business impact of that recovery timeline? And whether cyber insurance covers the ransom payments. Many organizations discover their alternatives are worse than they expected. With compromised backups, recovery timelines extend to weeks, business impact becomes catastrophic. The decision that seemed clear from a principle standpoint becomes agonizing when facing real operational consequences. And organizations must decide whether to involve law enforcement, which creates additional complications. Law enforcement typically recommends do not pay the ransom, but they often cannot guarantee that they could help recover data or quickly apprehend attackers. Some organizations fear that involving law enforcement might provoke attackers to destroy data or refuse to decrypt even if ransom is paid. Law enforcement needs access to compromised systems for investigation, which conflicts with the urgency to restore operations. Evidence preservation requirements, slow response. Different organizations make different decisions about law enforcement involvement based on their specific circumstances and risk calculations. While dealing with immediate crisis, organizations must also begin forensic investigations to understand how the attack occurred. This investigation is necessary to ensure the attacker is actually removed from the environment, to prevent reinfection after restoration, to understand what data was exfiltrated, to satisfy legal and regulatory requirements, and to improve security to prevent recurrence. But forensic investigation takes time and resources that are desperately needed for restoration. Organizations have to balance these competing priorities during the crisis. Understanding the encryption phase should inform preparation and response planning. Organizations should practice incident response procedures before actual attacks occur. Defining decision-making processes, communication plans, and response response protocols in advance allows faster, more effective response during actual incidents. Identify critical systems and data that must be protected or restored first. Develop prioritized recovery plans rather than attempting to restore everything simultaneously. Ensure backup systems are truly isolated from the production network so they could not be compromised during the reconnaissance phase. Test backup restoration regularly to verify it actually works under pressure, not just once. Prepare for the reality that you might face the ransom payment decision. Even organizations committed to never paying should have processes for evaluating that decision if circumstances change. Next, our final lesson in this section will review more why ransomware succeeds, how it's evolving, and what the future of this threat looks like.